Double life of my wife exposed. I filmed everything. How long has she been cheating on me? This is the updated version of the tale, which includes all of the modifications that were specified. I am 37 years old, and my name is Mike. I was under the impression that my life with my wife, Laura, was ideal up until very recently. We have been married for 9 years, and we have 3 lovely children. Our home is located in the suburbs, and it is quite pleasant. On the surface, everything appeared to be in order. Nevertheless, when I look back, I realize that there were indications that I skipped over or decided to disregard. When we were both in college, Laura and I became friends. One of those whirlwind relationships that you believe only happens in movies. It was a real thing. The moment we received our diplomas, we decided to start our lives together by getting married. While I work in information technology, she has always been the more extroverted of the two of us. She is a real estate agent. Although her profession required a lot of late hours and networking, I never had any doubts about her abilities. I had her total and utter faith. I may have been overly trusting. 3 years ago, when our youngest child was born, we secured the services of a babysitter named Nick. Nick, who is 25 years old and now attending college, appeared to be the ideal candidate for our family. In my opinion, he is a wonderful person who is always nice, is wonderful with children, and is just a lovely man in general. The fact that Laura had met him through a client and that he came highly recommended was the primary reason why she persisted on employing him. I didn't give it a second thought at all. Since a few months back, things have been feeling a little weird. As time went on, Laura became more distant. She was always on her phone, and she began to stay up late more frequently. Although I attributed it to the pressures of her profession, I couldn't escape the impression that something wasn't quite right that she was experiencing. On occasion, she would get home late into the night, smelling as though she had been drinking, which was not something that she did very often. A blow was also dealt to our sexual lives. Her excuses were usually the same: she was too exhausted, she was not in the mood, or the children were keeping her occupied. I did my best to be understanding, but it was difficult to avoid the feeling of being rejected. The moment of no return occurred on Thursdays 2 weeks ago. Although I often work until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I was able to complete a significant assignment earlier than normal, and I made the decision to come home and surprise Laura and the children. I was thinking that perhaps we might have a night out as a family, where we would order some pizza and watch a movie. Upon entering the driveway, I observed that Nick's vehicle was parked at the front of the house. Although his presence was not out of the ordinary, there was a sense of unease about it. At the time when I entered the house, it was far too quiet. As I made my way through the home, I yelled out for Laura and the children, but unfortunately, I did not receive any response. I was getting closer to the den when I heard voices that were muffled and giggling. The closer I approached, the more obvious it became that Laura and Nick were the ones in question. I peeked through the window of the den and saw them sitting on the couch, which was so near that it was uncomfortable. As soon as I saw them kiss, my heart stopped beating. It was more than just a peck, it was a passionate kiss, and it ended up breaking me. I was unable to bear witness to what I was seeing. There was an affair going on between my wife, who is also the mother of my children, and our babysitter. When I was overcome with shock and rage, I wanted to rush in and face them, but I was unable to do so because I was stuck in place. I made sure that I wasn't hallucinating things by taking out my phone and recording a portion of what I observed when I was out and about. I was unable to get to sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the scene, wondering how long it had been going on and what I had done to deserve this. I kept repeating it in my thoughts. As is customary, Laura arrived late to bed, and I feigned to be sleeping the entire time. I needed some time to think about what the next step should be. Shall I confront her about it? Should I go outside? Despite the fact that my thoughts were racing with a million questions, one thing was crystal clear: I wanted to possess complete knowledge. As a result, here I am, telling you all about my experience in the hopes of receiving some guidance, and perhaps even some assistance. Following that evening, I made the decision to remain silent about what I had witnessed. Despite the fact that I needed more information before I could address Laura, I did all in my power to continue acting normally. The length of time that this had been going on was completely unknown to me, and I wanted to make sure that I had all of the proof with me. In addition, There was a part of me that inquired about the extent to which she would go with her lies and deception. On the next morning, I pretended that everything was not a problem. Upon rising, I proceeded to prepare breakfast for the children, and, as I had always done, I kissed Laura on the cheek. I had to muster up all of my self-control to keep my emotions in check when she smiled at me, since it was the same grin that I used to adore. I had to maintain my composure and be cool. I began to pay more attention to Laura's conduct gradually over the course of the subsequent several days. I saw that she was using her phone a lot more, and she was always checking her messages or sending texts. I asked her about it, but she simply shrugged it off and said that it was something that was linked to her profession. Even though I knew better, I went along with it. It was then that I began to check her phone anytime I got the opportunity, but she was quite astute. She would remove all of her calls and messages that she had with Nick. Having made the decision to become somewhat more tech-savvy, I decided to install a surveillance software on her phone. I was able to view all of her messages, call logs, and even her whereabouts within a day. It was a really simple process. When I did it, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of shame, but I had to know the truth. In point of fact, there were a great number of texts that she and Nick exchanged, and each and every one of them confirmed my worst concerns. It had been many months since they had last seen one another, and they had been getting together whenever they had the opportunity, even in our own house without me being present. Having to read such texts was like putting salt on a sore that was already open. They mentioned how much they liked being together, how exciting it was to sneak about, and even made fun of me for being so naive. They talked about how much they enjoyed being together. After reading those texts, I realized that Laura was an entirely different person, someone I had never seen before. Rather than immediately addressing her, I began to consider some ways in which I could make the situation more favorable for myself. I desired retribution, but more than that, I desired to ensure that she was aware of the seriousness of the situation she had created for herself. I desired for her to experience some of the same agony and humiliation that she had imposed upon me. One evening, when Laura was out with friends, I conducted some research and discovered that Nick had a bit of a troubled history. I was surprised to learn this information. In the past, he had been involved in a few small legal issues, ones that were not really significant, but were enough to cause some eyebrows to be raised. I reasoned that if I could amass a sufficient amount of dirt for him, I would be able to strike him where it would hurt the most. I immediately began gathering any and every proof that I could discover. A few of their phone calls were even taped, and I took pictures and saved all of the messages and call records that were sent and received. As I worked on constructing a case, it became more compelling with each passing day. For the sole purpose of obtaining guidance on how to handle the situation without getting myself into trouble, I also sought out to a buddy of mine who worked in law enforcement. The more I discovered, the more enraged I became, but I also had a peculiar sense of fulfillment and control. In this situation, I was not going to be the victim. The issue was going to be under my control, and I was going to make sure that both Laura and Nick were held accountable for their actions. For the time being, I maintained my composure around Laura and pretended that everything was okay. Although I was aware that the time for confrontation would soon arrive, I desired for it to take place on my own terms. Similar to what they had done to me, I intended to surprise them and take them by surprise. It had been a week since I had made my first discovery, and although I had gathered sufficient proof to take action, I still had not made a decision on the manner in which I intended to play out the situation. I spent endless hours laying awake, my mind racing with ideas of vengeance and justice. I was determined to get answers. As Laura continued to engage in dishonest behavior, she was completely unaware of the fact that I was aware of everything. In the evening, Laura remarked that she had to stay late at work. I was aware that it was yet another motivation to meet Nick. My suggestion was made in a casual manner that I take the children to my parents' place for the weekend. Without any hesitancy, she gave the impression of being relieved. Rather than driving to my parents' place, I drove about the neighborhood until I saw Nick's car drive up in front of our house. I then packed up the children and proceeded out of the house. Despite the fact that my blood was boiling, I managed to keep my calm. As soon as I saw this possibility, I realized it was the ideal time to put my plan into action. Considering that Laura is spending more time away from the house, I decided to take advantage of the opportunity to set up a few covert cameras in the bedroom and the den. To be honest, I never imagined that I would be in a position to do that, but when things become bad, you have to do whatever it takes. The video would be irrefutable proof that she had betrayed the trust placed in her. The night before, I used my phone to monitor the camera feeds and keep an eye on them. The experience was akin to witnessing a horror film unfold in slow motion. Being able to witness them interacting with one another, caressing and laughing before finally heading into our bedroom, was nearly too much for me to stomach. I made sure that I had numerous copies of everything recorded and saved in places that were different from one another. In the morning of the following day, I watched the video while my hands were shaking with anger. Laura arrived at home early in a bright mood, and totally oblivious to the fact that I had anything on her. It required every ounce of self-control I possessed to refrain from confronting her at that very moment. But I was aware that I needed to play the long game in order to make sure that she was facing the full penalties. Over the course of the subsequent several days, I continued to collect evidence by keeping a log of every interaction they had. The longer I stared, the more determined I grew to do action. My intention was not only to confront her, rather, I intended to shatter the life that she had constructed on falsehoods. On Wednesday of the following week, Laura made the announcement that she would be absent for a period of 3 days due to a business trip. Just right. After giving her a tearful farewell kiss and wishing her a safe journey, I immediately went to work after she had departed. I called in sick at work and told them that I had a family emergency, which was not far from the truth by any stretch of the imagination. During the course of the day, I spent my time making copies of all of the recordings, printing off the messages that may be used as evidence, and putting everything into a tidy little package. When Laura came back, I persevered in maintaining my typical behavior, which was becoming increasingly challenging. However, I had to maintain the act for a little while longer, since every time I glanced at her, I saw the lady who had broken my heart. I had been waiting for the day when I would finally be able to confront her, with the intention of guaranteeing that the children would not be present to see the aftermath. I waited until they were at school. I positioned the laptop on the table in the dining room, waited for the movie to start playing, and then I set everything up for Laura to return home. She smiled as she entered the room and placed her handbag on the ground. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" When I said, "Sit down, Laura," my tone was more icy than I had wanted it to be. She was perplexed, but complied with my request. The moment I pressed the play button on the video, her look went from one of bewilderment to one of fear as she witnessed Nick and herself display on the screen. Her face was completely devoid of color as she stutteringly said, "What is this?" "This," I said, pointing to the laptop, "is the end of our marriage." She began to cry and reached for my hand, but I resisted her. "This is the end of our marriage. Mike, I can explain." In response, I stood up and began to pace around the room. "No," I said. There were tears streaming down her cheeks, but I did not feel any pity for her. "You don't get to explain. I've seen enough. I've heard enough. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and making a fool out of me in my own home. I trusted you, Laura. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" She wailed, trying to find the appropriate words to express her feelings, but there were none that could correct the harm that had been done. "I'm sorry, Mike. I am so sorry." "Sorry isn't good enough," I murmured, my voice cracking beneath the strain. "I am filing for divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You need to pack your things and leave. I can look at you right now." Laura's sobbing became an increasing amount louder, but I did not falter in my resolve to support her. "Think about the kids, Mike. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix it." "You should have thought about the kids before you decided to cheat," I remarked with a chilly expression. As soon as I finished saying that, I exited the room because I needed to get away from her. "You've destroyed this family, and I won't let you continue to hurt us. Pack your things and go. Now." It was a mixture of anguish and relief that I experienced as I walked out of the house. I had just made the first step toward recovering my life, but this was just the beginning of a long and difficult road. At least now I had taken the starting point. My attention shifted to Nick. I wasn't going to give him the opportunity to escape this situation unharmed. My confidence had been betrayed by him since he had integrated himself into my family. As a result of his conduct, he had to face the consequences. First, I performed some research about Nick's life and his background. He was a student at a college who had a spotless record, with the exception of a few small legal incidents. In a modest apartment located off campus, he made his home. By being familiar with his habit and history, I was able to better plan my next move. I made the decision to strike him where it would hurt him the most in his future and in his reputation. I gathered all of the proof that I had that they were having an affair, including the videos, the text messages, and the photographs that were incriminating. Every single thing was saved on a number of different USB devices, and I made sure that I had backup copies properly kept. After work, I made my way to Nick S.'s place one evening. In a fit of rage, I banged on his door, and my hands began to shake. Immediately after he spotted me, the smug expression that had been on his face disappeared as he responded. Although he was obviously anxious, he stutteringly said, "Mike, what are you doing here?" In the apartment, I pushed by him and said, "We need to talk," as I entered the building. He had the audacity to hinder me. I went into his living room, sat down, and gave him a stern look as I did so. He moved across from me and sat down, his face looking pallid. "Sit. Look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I laughed it off. He was about to say something, but I interrupted him and said, "Didn't mean for it to happen? You've been screwing my wife for months. Don't insult me with your apologies." He wanted to say something, but I stopped him. It was then that I took out one of the USB discs and threw it onto the table. "Here is what is going to happen. You're going to listen, and you're going to do exactly as I say. If you don't, I will make sure that everyone in your life knows what kind of person you are. On that drive is everything: videos, texts, pictures. I've got copies stored in multiple places. If you try anything, I'll release it all to your college, your professors, your family, and every potential employer I can find." As Nick made the decision to pick up the USB drive, his eyes widened in terror as he became aware of the seriousness of the situation. "What do you want from me?" Then I leaned in closer. "First, you are going to quit your job as our babysitter effective immediately. You are going to stay away from my family and never contact Laura again." "Understood?" He responded with a forceful nod. "Yes, I understand. Good. Second, you are going to write a letter of apology to my children. They may not understand everything now, but one day they will. You owe them that much." Nick gulped hard and gave another nod of approval. "I'll do it. I promise." I proceeded by saying, "Third, you are going to inform your college about what you have done. Tell them that you have been involved in inappropriate conduct and that you need to step back from your responsibilities. If you don't, I'll make sure that they find out anyway." His face became even whiter, but he did not dispute with me. He was aware that he had no other option. "I'll tell them." When I stood up, I was taller than he was. "Remember, Nick, I've got copies of everything. If I hear that you've tried to contact Laura or caused any trouble, I'll destroy you. Do you understand?" He spoke in a shaky voice. "I understand. I want to do anything, I swear." My departure from his residence was accompanied by a sensation of gloomy contentment. While it was not sufficient to repair the damage that Laura and Nick had caused, it was a beginning in the right direction. I had taken charge of the matter and made certain that Nick would be held accountable for the acts he had taken. Nick emailed me the following day, which was the following day. It was a scanned copy of the letter that he had written to my children, which was not only filled with remorse, but also with an apology. Even though I had no idea if my children would ever read it, I knew that it was something. In addition to that, he disclosed to me that he had resigned from his position and had notified his institution, therefore admitting to his inappropriate behavior. With my vengeance against Nick having been carried out and my fury having been somewhat subdued, it was time to confront the unavoidable, the divorce of Laura. I was aware that this would be a lengthy and difficult process, yet it was essential for both my own recovery and the health and happiness of our children. In order to provide support for my argument, I had previously held a consultation with a divorce attorney and gathered all of the proof that Laura had been unfaithful. When I handed Laura the divorce papers on the morning of the divorce, I experienced a range of feelings. Irritation was present, of course, but there was also a terrible sense of loss. In spite of everything, she had been my companion for a considerable amount of time, and it was difficult to relinquish all of the memories that we had enjoyed together. On the other hand, the treachery had irreparably damaged our marriage, and there was no way to get it back together again. For the purpose of guaranteeing that the children would not be present during the encounter, I decided to serve the papers at home while they were at school. Upon entering the room with the documents in my possession, I found Laura in the kitchen, enjoying a cup of breakfast coffee. "Laura," I responded, maintaining a steady but forceful tone in my voice, "we need to talk." When she looked up, her eyes were apprehensive. "What is it, Mike?" I arranged the papers in a table configuration. She went for the papers with shaky hands, and her face became pale as she said, "These are divorce papers. I'm filing for divorce on the grounds of infidelity. Mike, please, can we talk about this? We can work through it." I gave a little shake of my head. While she was reading over the paperwork, tears began to spring up in her eyes. "No, Laura, there is no way to work through this. You betrayed me, and you betrayed our family. This is the only way forward." "But the kids? What about the kids?" By saying, "We'll figure out a custody arrangement that is best for them," I was attempting to keep my emotions in check. As Laura grieved, she buried her face in her hands and said, "They deserve stability and a loving environment, and right now, that is not something we can provide together. I am so sorry, Mike. I never meant for it to go this far." I took a deep breath, and despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. Sorry doesn't change what happened. We need to do what's right for the kids and ourselves. The specifics of the divorce were hammered out by our attorneys over the course of the subsequent several weeks. It was decided that we would share custody of the children, with Laura having custody during the week and me having custody on the weekends. There would be a sale of the house, and the earnings would be split. Although it was excruciating, it was the most equitable answer. As I was gathering my belongings for the day, my daughter Lily entered the room at some point during the afternoon. Even though she was only 8 years old, she possessed a strong sense of awareness. She asked her father, with her large brown eyes filled with a sense of bewilderment, "Daddy, why are you packing?" I got down on my knees and grasped her little hands in mine. I put myself on her level. "Lily, sweetheart, Mommy and I are going to live in different houses from now on, but you'll still see both of us, and we both love you very much." She wrapped her arms around me firmly as tears began to well up in her eyes. "But why, Daddy? Why can't you and Mommy stay together?" My search for the appropriate words was a challenge. During the time that I was holding her, my heart bled all over again. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are too big to fix. But none of this is your fault, okay? We're still a family, just in a different way. The consequences of Laura's treachery were felt by a far wider audience than simply the two of us. Our naive children, who had no way of contributing to this catastrophe, were impacted by it. It strengthened my resolve to do everything it takes to provide kids with a secure and loving home, regardless of how challenging the path that lies ahead may be. It was a bizarre experience when Laura and I signed the official divorce papers a day ago. We went over the paperwork in a thorough manner, while seated in a clean conference room with our attorneys by our sides. My husband and I felt as though each signature was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. After everything was finished, Laura gazed at me with eyes that were ringed with red. "Mike, I know you'll never forgive me, but I hope one day you can find peace." I could not trust myself to talk, so I just nodded once. In that case, there was no longer any room for rage or blame. All that was left was a numbing acceptance of what had taken place. After leaving the meeting room, I was experiencing a peculiar mixture of relief and sadness. My relationship with Laura had reached its conclusion, and it was now time for me to turn my attention to the prospects that lay ahead. In addition to my work and my children, I was also faced with the challenging task of starting again and reconstructing my life from the ground up. It was not for Laura that I allowed myself to weep a few tears as I drove away, rather. It was for the life that we had once dreamed of, but had now tragically lost forever. On the other hand, I observed a glimmer of optimism. I knew that with time I would be able to recover from the horrors that I had endured. Despite the fact that the path that lay ahead was undetermined, it was mine to design. I was going to move on, one step at a time, since the challenges I had been through had made me stronger and wiser. My divorce was finalized, and I believed that the worst of my situation was behind me. It was a complete surprise to me that Laura was not finished with her scheming. The divorce and the manner in which I revealed her affair caused her to be quite angry. Because of her rage, she harbored a grudge against me, and she was resolute in her goal to make my life as terrible as it could possibly be. Strange occurrences began to take place just a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. A call came in from my supervisor, alerting me that I had been accused of wrongdoing at work by an individual who wished to remain anonymous. Even though the allegations were without merit, they prompted an inquiry within the organization. The experience was both unpleasant and embarrassing. However, I was fortunate in that my coworkers and supervisors knew me well enough to recognize the lies that were being spoken about me. Subsequently, Laura made an attempt to alienate our children from me. They would hear her talk lies about me, portraying me as the monster who was responsible for the destruction of our family. The questions that my daughter Lily and my son Tommy, who is 6 years old, would ask me were ones that no kid should ever be forced to ask. During one evening, Lily asked her father, "Daddy, did you really make Mommy cry because you don't love her anymore?" Her eyes, which were filled with innocence and sadness, were filled with uncertainty and hurt. Despite the pain in my chest, I gave her a bear embrace. "Lily, sweetheart, I love you and Tommy more than anything in the world. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are too big to fix, but that doesn't mean I don't love you or your mom. It's just something that happened between us." Despite my promises, the damage had already been caused. I was heartbroken to watch the children struggling to cope with the circumstance, since they were caught in the crossfire because of the scenario. Another attempt was made by Laura to make my life more difficult financially. It was her contention that she was entitled to more than what was agreed upon in the divorce settlement that she challenged. She brought me back before the judge, but happily, the judge was able to see through her strategy and affirmed the settlement that had been reached initially. Even if it was a minor triumph, it came at the expense of further stress and additional legal expenditures. The last straw was when she contacted Child Protective Services CPS on me, claiming that I was an unsuitable father. This was the conclusion of the situation. Despite the disgraceful nature of the allegations and the fact that they were wholly untrue, an inquiry was launched. CPS came to my house, conducted interviews with both me and the children, and even talked to some of my neighbors. I had a terrible nightmare. It was hard for me to think that Laura would go to such a low level, but I should have just known better. She acted in a vengeful and desperate manner. As the probe stretched on for several weeks, it threw a shadow of insecurity over my current existence. In the evening, once I had finished putting the children to bed, I sat down with my attorney, Emily, who had been a reliable ally during all of this difficulty. When I asked Emily, "How can I make this stop?" my voice was filled with irritation and tiredness. "How can I make this stop?" Emily let out a sigh, her countenance displaying compassion. "Mike, we need to build a solid case against Laura S. false accusations and harassment. Document everything, every lie, every false report, every attempt she makes to manipulate the situation. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be." I nodded, resolute to put up a show of resistance. "I can let her keep doing this. It's not just affecting me, it is hurting the kids." Everything was thoroughly documented by me over the course of the subsequent few weeks. Every conversation that I had with Laura, every occasion in which she attempted to turn the children against me, and every false report that she made, were all documented in a diary that I kept. Additionally, I set surveillance cameras all around my home in order to record any attempt that she could make to increase the mistreatment she is experiencing. Upon returning home from a visit with Laura, Lily presented me with a message that she had written. Upon opening the message, I read Laura S. poisonous remarks, which caused my rage to rise to a boiling point. "Mommy said to give this to you." She threatened to take complete custody of the children and ruin my life, accusing me of anything that could possibly be alleged against me. In the end, that was the last piece of proof that I required. I submitted a petition for a restraining order against Laura with the assistance of my attorney. Every piece of proof that she had harassed us, the fraudulent reports that she had made, and the manipulation of our children was shown to us. A single glance at the avalanche of evidence was all that was required for the court to approve the restraining order, which will restrict Laura S. interactions with me and the children to visits that are monitored. Despite the fact that it was a win that was hard fought, it offered a sense of relief. In the end, Laura S.'s efforts to disrupt my life were being thwarted, and I was finally able to begin concentrating on putting things back together again. After the event, I had a lengthy conversation with Lily and Tommy, during which I explained everything to them in a way that they could comprehend. Despite the fact that I reassured them that both of their parents loved them, I also explained that sometimes adults have to make difficult choices in order to ensure that everyone is safe and happy. The situation started to get better gradually but steadily. While I focused on being the best parent I could be, the children adjusted to the new normal that had been established. I began visiting a therapist in order to assist me in processing everything that I had been through, and I found peace in the work that I did. When I was putting Lily to bed one evening, she gazed up at me with her huge, innocent eyes. There was a moment of silence. "Daddy, are things going to be okay now?" I smiled as I removed a stray hair from her face and brushed it away. As I turned out the light and shut the door to her bedroom, I experienced a sense of calm. I said, "Yes, sweetheart. Things are going to be okay. We are going to be just fine." After the storm had gone, I knew that even if the path that lay ahead of us was still unclear, we would face it together, even more powerful than we had been before. At the very moment when I believed that everything was finally beginning to settle down, life threw another curveball my way. The event took place on a Monday that appeared to be typical. During the time that I was at work, I was concentrating on a project when I got a phone call from the principal of Lily S. University. Fearing the worst, my heart dropped as I responded to the question. "Mr. Johnson, this is Principal Clark. We need you to come to the school immediately. There has been an incident involving Lily." Panic swept through my body. "Is she okay? What happened?" As I hurried to the school, my mind was racing with the various scenarios that may occur. "She is physically unharmed, but it is urgent that we discuss this in person. Please come as soon as you can." When I arrived, I was shown to the principal's office, where Lily was sitting with her eyes red from bawling her eyes out. In close proximity to her was a woman who appeared to be taking a serious stance. "Mr. Johnson, this is Mrs. Adams from Child Protective Services." Principal Clark introduced the individual to Mr. Johnson. Although I was attempting to maintain my composure, I squatted down in front of Lily and said, "We've called her in because Lily reported something very troubling today." "Sweetheart, what is going on?" Lily asked me as she stared at me with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, I didn't mean to make trouble. I just told them what Mommy said." Although my heart was hurting for her, I asked her in a soft voice, "What did Mommy say?" After a moment of hesitation, Lily dropped her voice and murmured, "Mommy told me that if you don't let her see us more, she'll tell everyone that you hurt us." As her words took effect, the room began to spin. Our daughter was being threatened by Laura, who was using her as a pawn to exert her influence over me. I had a flash of rage, but I made a conscious effort to maintain my composure for the sake of Lily. The principal, Clark, and Mrs. Adams shared a gloomy gaze with one another. "Mr. Johnson, based on Lily's statement, we need to take this very seriously," Mrs. Adams stated in response. "We're going to launch a full investigation." In a state of helplessness and rage, I nodded my head. "I understand. Please do whatever you need to ensure my children are safe." Over the course of the subsequent several days, the inquiry progressed. Laura was interviewed by Child Protective Services, and she, of course, denied everything, portraying herself as the victim. Words spoken by Lily, on the other hand, were convincing proof. Even though she was little, she was able to understand what her mother had said. I maintained a tight check on the children during this turbulent time, making sure that they were aware of their safety and that they were loved. Even though I could feel the tension of the situation, I knew that I had to keep my composure for the sake of them. At that moment, when it appeared like everything was about to spin out of control, an unexpected ally appeared in the form of Grace, Laura's sister. Even though we had never been especially close, we had always been friendly. It was as if she had reached out to me out of the blue. Her tone was tight as she questioned Mike over the phone. "Mike, is it possible for us to talk?" "Of course, Grace. What is going on?" Grace didn't hold back when she stated, "It's about Laura. I've been worried about her behavior lately, and I think you need to know some things." While we were meeting at a neighborhood cafe, Grace was quite forthright. The unpredictable conduct of Laura, as well as her developing preoccupation with exacting revenge on me, had been brought to her attention. The texts that Grace discovered on Laura's phone revealed that she was prepared to go to whatever extent necessary to obtain custody of the children. These messages suggested that she was willing to fabricate evidence and manipulate Lily in order to achieve her goal. "I can stand by and watch her destroy you and use the kids like this," Grace said, her eyes full with sorrow. "I can do that. I want to help. I'll testify if I have to." It was her words that saved my life. Laura's credibility was severely damaged as a result of Grace's testimony and the growing body of evidence gathered during the inquiry. The court approved my request for full custody of the children, with the condition that Laura's visitation privileges be severely restricted and supervised. Laura was enraged, but there was not much she could do about the situation. The consequences of her conduct had at long last struck her, a win that was both bitter and delicious. Even though I was happy to have my children safe and with me, it was extremely upsetting to witness the person I had once loved reduced to such a state of desperation and lying. As time went on, life gradually returned to its previous state. Under the favorable conditions that I provided, Lily and Tommy flourished, put up a lot of effort to deliver. Grace remained in contact with us, thus she became an important component of our network of support. One night, while we were sitting around the dinner table, Lily smiled at me and looked up at me over her shoulder. As I held her, tears began to spring up in my eyes, and I said, "Daddy, I'm glad we are all together. You're the best daddy in the world. Thank you, sweetheart. I love you both so much." After several months had gone, life started to settle into a new routine that was consistent. I was beginning to acquire a new feeling of normalcy, and the children were adjusting to the new environment quite well. I'd even begun dating once more, and I would say that I was cautiously hopeful about the future. On the other hand, just when I believed that the worst was behind me, life managed to throw one more curveball my way. I made the decision to clean out the garage on a Saturday morning when the temperature was chilly. Getting things organized was something I had been putting off for a number of months, and I finally decided that it was time to get things in order. During the process of sorting through dusty shelves and old boxes, I came upon an old shoebox that was hidden away in the corner of the room. I opened it up out of curiosity and discovered a collection of letters and photographs. The initial few letters were innocuous enough, and they were old love notes that Laura and I had sent to each other back in our younger days. However, as I delved further, I discovered a collection of letters that were written to Laura and dated from around the time when our marriage began to break apart completely. They were sent by a person whose name was Brian. While I was reading the messages, I had a shiver that ran down my spine. The words that Brian said were brimming with love and ardor, and they contained descriptions of covert gatherings and plans for a future together. During our conversation, he expressed his eagerness for Laura to depart from me so that they may begin their new life together. Specifically, one letter stuck out from the others. It was only a few weeks before I found out that Laura was having an affair with Nick that we started dating. The vacation that they were going to take was a romantic retreat to celebrate their new beginning, and Brian wrote about it in his letter. The realization that Laura had been seeing Brian for a considerable amount of time prior to her involvement with Nick caused my pulse to race. It became very evident to me as I went through the letters that Laura had been leading a double life for a considerable amount of time. It was only the tip of the iceberg when it came to the romance with Nick. At the same time that she was acting that everything was normal, she had been lying to me and to our entire family, with the intention of leaving us for another guy. Despite the fact that I was experiencing a mixture of rage and betrayal once more, I proceeded to search through the shoebox. At the very bottom, I discovered a little purse made of velvet. There was a diamond ring inside, which was obviously an engagement ring that was intended for Laura. At that moment, the truth struck me like a ton of bricks. I was aware that Laura was making preparations to leave me and marry Brian. I inhaled deeply and tried to digest all that had happened, including the falsehoods and the dishonesty. It was just was much to bear. Despite the fact that I had believed that the worst was behind me, this discovery brought up old pains. Even though it would require me to bring up the past, I was certain that I needed to face Laura about this matter. Later on that day, I contacted Laura and asked her to come over to my house. I said that we needed to discuss something significant, and she agreed to come. Upon her arrival, she appeared anxious, as she had picked up on the gravity in my tone of speech. "Mike, what's going on?" she questioned as she stood in the living room, her eyes darting around the room. I made my way to the kitchen table and arranged the letters and the ring in a neat and orderly fashion. "I found these in the garage today. Care to explain? At the sight of the objects, her face became a pallid color. She took a few cautious steps forward, her hands trembling. Mike, I don't know what to say. My tone was calm but icy as I said, how about the truth for once? While my voice remained steady, Laura, you have been lying to me for years. Not just with Nick, but with this guy Brian. You were planning to leave me to start a new life with him. Were you ever going to tell me? Tears flowed down her cheeks, but I did not feel any pity for her situation. Yes, I was seeing Brian. It started a few years ago. I was unhappy and I felt trapped, but things didn't work out with him. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. I had already ruined everything. You have ruined our family, Laura, I cried, my voice cracking as I spoke. You made me feel like I was the problem, like I wasn't good enough, all the while you were planning your escape. I am sorry, she cried out in tears. I am so sorry, Mike. I know I can undo the past, but please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt you. I responded by saying, it is too late for apologies, and I felt a weird sensation of peace wash over me. Ivy moved on and I'm building a new life for myself and the kids. You need to live with the consequences of your actions. Laura nodded, tears still streaming down her cheeks. Ivy moved on, I understand. I just hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. In all candor, I stated, I'm not sure if I am able to. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as Laura departed. But I know one thing, I want to let your betrayal define me. I'm going to keep moving forward, for myself and for our kids, I said as Laura left. Although the past was unpleasant, I was eventually able to put it in the past. The fact that I had discovered the entire depth of Laura's lying provided me with the sense of closure that I required in order to genuinely go on with my life. The city is Denver,